Hey guys, and welcome back to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. I am Ray Russell, and this week we return yet again back to Georgia Championship Wrestling. Now we're in 1984, going to continue to look at all of the stars and tell more of the stories going on behind the scenes. And who better to do that than a guy that was there the entire time from the beginning of 1983 through the demise, the purchase from Jim Crockett Promotions. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the program, Mr. Bob Roop.
Well, hello out there, ladies and gentlemen, because I always say hello to Ray first, but I thought, this time I'm going to change it up a little bit because now I need Ray real bad. I wouldn't be doing this, but both of us need you to be listening to us, or he wouldn't be doing it either. So now I'm going to come back. Let's put it this way. I'll save the best for last. Hey, Ray, good to talk to you again, man. How you doing?
Oh, it's all right, Bob. I forgive you. I mean, we did talk for about a half an hour before we went on the air, so that's totally okay with me. Yeah, absolutely. We need the listeners out there. Man, Bob, it's good to be back. Yeah. It's been fun. We talked about that angle where you were wrestling referee Nick Patrick in some lights out matches, and so I did a little more digging. I don't know that I have an exact answer, but I did have a couple people step forward and say they remembered bits and pieces of the story. And basically what it was and I'm probably still not hitting this exactly the way it went down, but something along the lines of Nick had went on TV and stated that he thought about getting into the wrestling side of things. He didn't just want to be a referee. He thought about maybe becoming a wrestler. And here comes big bad Bob Roop. Hey, you want to be a wrestler, boy? Come over here. And wouldn't you know it, kind of, you twist them into knots, maybe you injure them. I don't really remember how it all played out in regards to what they were telling me, because they were just they had foggy memories as well. But basically what it was you picked on poor Nick Patrick, and he came back fighting. It sounds like he got you in some lights out matches there, and who knows what shenanigans went down in those house shows to where he was able to beat you some of those times. Of course, you had bigger matches earlier on the show, so this was just a little added detraction to keep the fans happy at the end of the night.
Yeah, I haven't been actively searching my memory files. I should have. I do vaguely remember working with him, and it was, if he beat me, then obviously he was credible, or however we did it. Let's put it this way: however we did it, if it was help from a referee or there was a third party involved, Nick had to obviously had to do his part to make it believable, or we will be talking about it for a different reason today. Hey, Bob, that expose where you wrestled, the guy that was for Nick Patrick, the fact that I was probably, at least 50 pounds, maybe 75 pounds. No, I wasn't that big. But he still wasn't real big. He might have gotten up to 200. The fact is, the matches, and I've said this many times before, the matches I don't remember are the ones like having first match with Bruiser Brody. Mm-hmm. I don't remember the match. I remember the setup to it, but I don't remember the match itself because it went well. And so the matches with Nick had to go well. If something had gone wrong, if the audience just farted at it or whatever, like, we don't play that crap, I would remember that because I hate to sound the wrong way. Think about it this way. If it was discovered and made plain that everything we were doing out there was all put on and we weren't able to change the audience's mind about that, I talked earlier about being in Germany where everybody laughed. Remember I talked about the German audience? They laughed. You do a move, look like it killed somebody. They all laughed their butt off. Well, that's what an American audience would have done. And see, that German audience was trained differently than American audiences were. American audiences were taught with, good against evil, and and the fact that if we had matches that were believable, and if we had, did we have any returns, or did we just go once all around?
It looks like it was one-offs, but it looks like Ole, booking-wise, he puts you in here with Nick Patrick in this story, maybe to build Nick. Maybe they were going to bring Nick back. I'm not sure. It doesn't last very long. Nick has a couple cups of coffee as a wrestler, and I know he aspired to be a wrestler following his father's footsteps, but I know Nick had some knee issues and things, and he would have to go back to being referee, which believe me, isn't an easy job either. You're running, you're hopping, you're communicating with the workers at all time. I mean, there's a lot to go into being a good referee, right? Like the top of the, card referees that we see, the guys that were there forever. That's a lot of work in itself. So he still put a lot of wear and tear on his body throughout and taking the occasional bump, right? The referee's got to take a bump every now and then, make it look good. Some didn't make it look good, but some of them did, and Nick was one of them. But yeah, so I noticed that, and we talked off here real quickly some of the names that we might bring up this week, and so it's kind of funny that I see Ole does that with you and Nick, and then right after that he does that. I don't want to say the similar thing, but again, another underneath guy, an up and comer, in Tim Horner is scoring wins over Bob Roop on the house show. So you go from basically being, other than doing some jobs to like Ronnie Garvin, at this point in time, you really hadn't done a whole lot of jobs in your year and a half here in the company. No. And now all of a sudden you're doing jobs to these referees and underneath guys. And anybody that sees that can tell, well, they're trying to do something here. They're trying to tell stories, not only leaving the fans happy, like, oh, that Bob Roop got what was coming to him, but obviously, at least in the case of Tim Horner, they're trying to build new talent, elevate talent, because this is right after Vince takes over TBS, and now Ole loses some guys, which we will also get to in just a minute.
Right.
But so now it's time we can't really put Road Warriors are leaving for Vern. Vince is taking so-and-so. What do we got left? We got to build our own, right? And so that's why we talked about Rip Rogers comes in, forms a team with Ted Oates. And in this instance, it looks like he's trying to use you to help elevate some of these underneath guys, like a referee, Nick Patrick, or in this case, Tim Horner. So do you have any memories of working with Tim or anything else you want to share?
Well, the fact that I remember being in the ring with him, but the fact, again, that all the matches obviously went well. I remember that he was just a greatest guy in the ring and also in the dressing room. He was one of the nicest guys. I hope that later life didn't turn into the devil or whatever, but I imagine he stayed the same decent guy he was his whole career. He had the moves and he had all the actions and everything that would make for like a fiery babyface, but he didn't have that fire, really. He didn't have it yet. Now, he was young in the business. He was credible. I mean, nobody poo-pooed or we usually bring people farting at your match. Nobody thought that, they believed what we were doing. And as far as my role, yes, now the heel's role is, we talked about that in our discussions about Paul Orndorff, is the heel's role is to put people over.
Right.
That's your job, is to get other, you can't have heels that are your main draw, and you can make that work. A lot of times the heels that are main draws are promoters who own the company. But anyway, Tim was a good hand. I loved watching him work. Him and a good tag team partner could just have if they had good opponents who could move a little bit, like maybe sheep herders or whatever, they could have some really, really good matches. I mean,
that is hilarious. You said that, Tim would go on, and I know you don't know this because you talked about not really being in tune with what was going on in the other promotions and whatnot, but Tim would eventually team with Brad Armstrong, and they would work with the sheep herders for the Cowboy. So, and they were good matches. So good call.
Well, Brad was, I remember the story. Brad, who was Brad's first partner? Did he have a brother that worked with him?
When he broke in, he teamed with his dad, Bob, obviously. But he teamed with Steve. I mean, he teamed with Scott. He teamed with a lot of his brothers.
Well, the story I remember, I've told it before, but I just want to repeat it because I got away from Tim Horner. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Brad and a partner, I'm pretty sure it wasn't Tim, but we're working in Philadelphia, and they worked a match before mine, and I was against Ronnie Garvin. And so I went out there and I was watching. I was a place where you could watch through the curtains, I think, like a theater. Mm-hmm. And I was watching the match, and those guys, they went out there, and the audience in Philadelphia was all smart to the business because McMahon Sr. was doing his TV taping there, and they would do 5 or 6 shows in a row, and, in the process, they exposed the business 4 or 5 times. So the audience there came to see a spectacle, and about 95% of them were smart. And so they would just hoot and holler and boo and start yelling boring and all that. And they were yelling that boring at Tim and his young partner and whoever the other guys that were with. They weren't they were not a seasoned team, whoever it was, because I watched those four guys run around for a half hour. I'm telling you, every one of them must have run at least a mile because they were doing crisscrosses, drop downs, running around the ring, just all kinds of stuff. They went about 30 minutes, but they never did ever get the fans to quit harassing them because they were doing what the fans wanted. The more that they stepped it up, the more the fans said, yeah, now we got these guys under control now. And that's why when Ronnie and I went out there, we didn't do anything. We tie in, push in the ropes, break up. All of a sudden we hear the boring. Ronnie said, get a headlock, take me over. I took him over. We laid there for 7, 8, or 10 minutes, however long it took. And we'd work a little bit. Sometimes he'd just sit there and kick his heel for a while, like a minute or two. Boring. And the boring got real loud. And then he'd work his way up and they'd get a little quieter. And finally, after about, I don't know, 8 or 9, 10 minutes, it seemed like a lifetime to me because the people are they're trying to make us listen to them by getting louder and louder.
Right. They're trying to control the match.
Yes. Well, it just happened with poor Brad and his partner, his brother, I think, the match before. And Ronnie just kept saying, no, just wait. And all of a sudden, it got kind of quiet and heard what they say. Will you people shut the F up? Maybe they'll do something. I never forgot that. I almost laughed myself. And then after, within 30 seconds, Ronnie and I got up and we started having a match. And guess what? We didn't get any more boring. We didn't get a standing ovation, but we didn't get any more talks about boring because if they started again, we'd have been back in the headlock.
Right.
So I remember that in contrast to our match. Brad and his match, they did more in the first 2 minutes, or the first minute of their match than Ronnie and I did in 15 minutes of our match. They did more moving around than we did because we didn't, we were working. We didn't have to. Ronnie knew how to tell a story. He could work with anybody. He could work with, I saw him work with Andre. I saw a film, him with Andre. Andre down on one knee. Ronnie's got a chair. He looked like they're both French. Andre was of French descent, and Ronnie was French Canadian, so they could talk to each other in French. And Andre would work with guys he liked. He almost got me and Bob Orton killed in Tallahassee one night. But Ronnie's got a chair. He's dancing around Andre, one side, the other, bashing him in the head with that chair. Andre's selling it. I mean, he's not going down, but he's moving his head like he's getting clocked. So, Ronnie could work with anybody and make it believable. Ronnie had 10 years of experience on me. Even though I was a heel, I never had any problem listening to a veteran if what he said made sense. Now, if it was something that just didn't make any sense, like say he wanted to say, let me come back, I say, well, no, wait a minute. Now, I didn't have that happen very often. A lot of times it might have been my reputation. People might have been afraid to think I'd do something like shoot with him or something, but I never would have unless provoked, of course. But anyway, Tim Horner was a good one. When we talked privately, you indicated that he had a long run and did, he was at least making a living for himself. And I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah, Tim spent a lot of time in and out. I mean, he worked for the UWF, the later part of the UWF, at least throughout the 1987 period before it absolves into Crockett. And then he would go on to work off and on for WCW in the late 80s, early 90s. He worked for Vince. He had worked there for about a year from the end of 88 through the end of 89. And he would eventually go on to be kind of, I guess, semi-little small points partner in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I don't really remember the backstory of that, but has a falling out with Jim Cornette eventually. And Corny's had a lot to say about that on his podcast in the past. But yeah, he's not a big fan of Tim Horner, the human being. But Tim, back in this time period, and really just watching him as a wrestling fan, it was always like, he was one of those guys you wanted to get behind, the underneath, the underdog guy kind of deal. And so I could see the fan going crazy. I believe it was Tim who beat Road Warrior Hawk by a fluke on a episode of Crockett TV on TBS later on. So
wow,
so they didn't really follow that up with a whole lot. I'm glad Glad they didn't do Hawk and Tim Horner rematches a whole lot. But you have to figure Hawk had to like Tim at least a little bit to agree to that, right? So I'm thinking on TV, right? So.
Oh yeah, well, Hawk was a good guy. I mean, I saw him later in his career. I mean, years later, after we moved up here, I saw him. He looked good. You know, he and Joe Laurinaitis, Animal, they both looked like they did. They were still both big, and they hadn't aged noticeably. I got Ted DiBiase was running a show in a church down in the Detroit area. A church had bought a show from him, and I went down to see him. Ted and I were emailing back and forth at the time, and he said he was going to be up in the area, so I went down to see him. And I didn't even know who was on the show, but Hawk and Animal were his main event, and that was really good to see him. And and Hawk still really looked good. And like I say, back in the early days, he and I shared an apartment with him for, I don't know, 6 months maybe. And I got a chance, we were together all the time when we were off, and he couldn't go out anywhere. He didn't want to because he's, so noticeable. And so we spent a lot of time together, had a lot of fun. We'd have people over and play Trivial Pursuit and different stuff. And he was fun. He was fun to be with. I never saw him. I know he was doing stuff, and later on he had some serious chemical problem with drugs, but a lot of people did. They maybe not to the extent that he did. He was kind of self-destructive with some of the stuff he did, but all of it is. But some people do it just to relax, and they're able to work and continue to work, and the whatever damage they're doing is not that noticeable. But the fact that Tim got a win over him, I'm glad to hear it. Tim was not quite a white meat baby face. Before he could interview, he kind of was, because he wasn't that big, but he was clean cut, and he didn't have a gimmick like say Boogie Woogie Man. He didn't, or Dusty. I remember once Bruiser turned heel or baby face. Dick the Bruiser I'm talking about. Dick the Bruiser. He's not your typical white meat baby face. He's your red meat and chewing it baby face. But well, I'm glad that Tim had at least a lengthy career where maybe he wasn't working steadily, maybe he wasn't making a fortune, but obviously he liked the business or he wanted to be in it. And I was glad he was able to stay in it for some length of time. You don't happen to know of his current situation, do you? Is he still with us?
Oh, yeah. I believe Tim's still around out there somewhere in Tennessee.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, if you happen to hear this or anybody knows Tim hears that, please accept my best wishes. I'm happy to be able to talk about you in a positive way. It was a pleasure knowing you. I hope I run into you somewhere. So, well, thanks, Ray, for bringing that up.
Absolutely. Well, here's another name from the past. Not a lot of people go on their podcasts and talk about him, but I believe he deserves a little credit because he gave a lot of credit to a lot of the stars he stepped into the ring with. And that is Pat Rose. Do you remember Pat?
Oh, yeah. Pat was a real kind of a middle of the card guy. I remember being able to do something when I was booking in Florida. I think I was able to put him against maybe Tyree Pride and the Bahamas for a main event, but that was the only place I really could because I never put him in an angle. In the States, in Florida, for example, he had done, he put so many people over, he'd done jobs for so long, it was really hard to push him. But good guy, great attitude, always went out there and, gave 100%, never complained. A good guy in the dressing room. It never caused me one bit of worry or just content with his behavior or anything about him. He was a really good guy, and what his situation is right now.
Yeah, well, last I heard, I assume he's still doing. You can do this and be up there in age. Pat was like a huge fisherman, like a pro fisherman, if I remember correctly, and I think he hosts tournaments and things now with fishing and whatnot. So. Pat got out of wrestling and got into fishing. He might have been doing both at the same time at one point, but he went on to go He spent a lot of, probably a few decades now in the fishing business.
Well, I see those shows sometimes. I even watched some of them. It's kind of interesting to watch somebody catch a big bass or something. I'm going to start checking to see if I can see him. Anyway, Pat, if you hear this, best wishes to you. Hope you catch a big one, my friend.
I'm sure he's caught a few over the years. But yeah, so it was always fun to see Pat Rose, a Georgia boy. So he spent a lot of time in Georgia, as you said, doing jobs. But he also got, small pushes here and there, depending on the size of a territory. But Pat was always one of those guys that was another great hand in the ring. You were going to get a good match, So it was like we talked about Mike Jackson. We talked about Tim Horner. Now, Pat Moore, he was used more. He could go either way if you needed him to, but he was better as the heel enhancement guy, I always thought. But Pat was always a great hand in the ring. So I thought another name that I wanted to bring up here on the show. But I wanted to go back because we talked about what we did with Tim Horner, putting Horner over you around the loop. We talked about what they were doing kind of with Nick Patrick going over you around the loop here and there with the lights out matches. But a lot of that started when Vince took over TBS, because not only did he take over the TV channel, he took some of the talent as well. A lot of people don't know that. They don't seem to realize that Vince didn't just get the TV slot. Some of the talent left Ole Anderson and jumped over to Vince McMahon. Another reason why Ole had to create new talent or bring in a new group of guys. And we've talked a little bit about this in the past, not on the air, but I wanted to talk about that to you today. If you have any memories about these guys all basically defecting at once, did they all do it differently? Did some guys give their notice? Did some guys just not show up? Because off the top of my head, it was the spoiler Don Jardine, who had the national title at the point. I bet Ole regrets just a few weeks prior to this happening, giving the spoiler the belt. He defeats Brad Armstrong, if I remember correctly, in the Omni. And so Spoiler's the new national heavyweight champion, the top title in Georgia, mind you guys. And then he leaps over to the WWF, and just to stick it to Ole a little more, Vince actually lets the Spoiler call himself the national heavyweight champion for at least a few months in the WW. Now, it doesn't mean anything to Vince, but just being able to do that, gotcha, pal. But the Spoiler, Les Thornton leaves, Wrestling 2 leaves, which, I mean, a Georgia mainstay. And Nikolai Volkov, the big Russian, leaves. There's just a few of the names that took off.
Well, Volkov, I remember, was Wrestling 2 being used a lot by Ole? Was he a main babyface?
Without looking, probably not. I'm sure, it just came with the territory of the Georgia thing, because Wrestling 2 had, there would be periods where they would use him, and then they wouldn't. So I can't say if he was very active at that exact moment when Vince took over, but he did show up immediately working for the WWF in the Georgia towns and in those loops and on TV as a job guy, unbelievably.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, work is work, right? I mean, I'm not going to find any fault with him. Always liked him, respected him, and still do. Yeah, I don't remember him being around that. I don't remember, because I'm sure I would have worked with him a few times.
Right.
And I don't remember that. Yeah, back, what you talked about a few minutes ago, when the guys left, Ole had to create new talent with what he had. And while he's bringing in, like looking for someone to bring in who's entirely unknown. And the other thing was, we didn't have that TV slot, that primetime slot on Saturday evening.
Right.
What were we on, 9:30 on Sunday morning or something like that?
It was morning. I don't remember if it was Saturday. I think it was Saturday morning, but
yeah,
either way,
it
was morning time, yeah.
Well, the TV fans weren't used to watching TV on Saturday morning. So our TV, I'm sure our share was small compared to that afternoon. So, the two shows that played at, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 o'clock, whatever time it was, those 2 hours, I'm sure had 4 or 5 times, I don't know, maybe 10 times the audience share that our it was going to take a time to get ours built up. The reason he using me, like he put it so gracefully and gleefully last week, of putting my big fat ass back in tights, was because we were looking for, I was a talent. I mean, I'd been off the TV for a long time.
Right.
I think I had been world television champion while I was there. I don't remember, but it wasn't a big deal. Let's put it this way: I hadn't been doing hot angles with anybody, so. But I was experienced wrestler and did have some cachet or whatever, a little bit of a rep left. And so, I obviously went back to work. Well, Ole had to build some new talent. That's where Tim Horner came in. That's where Nick Patrick came in, because at least everybody knew who he was. It wasn't just some unknown guy. His name, the fact, Bob Roop's going against the guy's a referee. I don't want to see it. I hate that Bob Roop, but that referee's probably going to get killed or whatever. There would be, some attraction or some way to maybe get fans to come. I don't remember, frankly, how badly our business dropped off after the break. I know it didn't. It had to go so far south that Ole was sold out to Crockett.
Yeah, Ole, he's talked about it in the past. I'm sure it's in his book. We're going to get to that when we continue on the story. But I know there was a decline in money, certainly, a big time. And that's why he had to be careful who he booked, because there were certain people maybe he could have got his hands on that he simply couldn't afford to keep around for long periods of time. And so I think that's why we see a lot of building new talent here. We see some of the some of your old buddies from the ICW coming through town. And yeah, obviously bringing you back out. You've been working more so as, for lack of a better term, an agent, driving around, handling business. And now Bob Roop's back in the ring more often than not, because, Bob, we need you out there. I mean, you talked about being the TV champion. You're the television champion twice, in fact. You hold the belt for the last 4 months of 1984. You're going to drop that to Ronnie Garvin, beat Ronnie back for it a week later, and hold it again until basically when Crockett comes in and takes over. And they abolish your version of the world TV title because, well, they have a TV title too. And obviously they own the company, so their TV title reigns supreme. But so you're basically the last television champion. Well, Ronnie has it for the final week, but for the better part of the last 7 months of the territory, you're the champ there with the TV belt. So you're doing a lot of work on TV. I remember there's a lot of great promos out there. I encourage everybody to go over to YouTube. You and Ted DiBiase form an alliance here in Georgia. The top heels, DiBiase's got the main belt, and you've got the TV belt, and you're cutting all these promos. Like, we got all the titles in town. We're the bad guys,
Right. Well, back to what we were talking about a minute ago. The reason that I think like Volkov, that's right. Is that the Russian or Volkov?
Yep.
And Jardine, the spoiler, those guys were veterans, and they knew. Here you got the WWE, or I think it might have still been the WWF.
Right.
Has come calling and says, "I'll take anybody." I don't know if McMahon said, "I'll use you big," I'll give you a great run or whatever, but he probably did. Of course, those guys now, and also. You just got the television purchased out from underneath you, the 2 hours. Of course, those guys are going to go when you think back on it. I mean, unless Ole, they might have gone to Ole and said, "Hey, can you guarantee me $1,000 a week or whatever," or what I was making, when they knew that without Ohio, that we weren't going to be able to, they could see that I think the veterans could see that Ole's company was in serious trouble,
right? And
that they had a sure place to go, make some serious money. And I don't blame them a bit. But looking back on it, there's no real loyalty in the wrestling business. I mean, there's been brothers who have fallings out, don't never speak to each other again. But I just remember that I was reflecting on that this morning when I saw. The only time I ever saw Vince McMahon Jr. in person, I liked Senior. He was cordial to me. I mean, he wasn't effusive. He didn't, glad hand and, tell me all kinds of anecdotes or anything. But he was cordial and respectful. And, I just worked a couple shows, preliminary matches, but he was, because Eddie Graham introduced me, he was cordial and respectful. Talked about my background and all that, and I like that. And he was a gentleman, but at least the part I saw. Vince Jr., I didn't like him. When I looked at him, I got a feeling from him. I just didn't like him. I didn't know him. Now the fact that he was taking the business, trying to ruin the business of a guy I really did like and respect, with Ole, had a big thing to do with it. But I didn't like him personally. If it had been something like, hey, let's all shake hands and then it's all business, I'm not sure I would have shaken hands with him. I just didn't like him. I looked at him and I don't know what it was. A heel, if you're going to survive and you're going to be a top heel, and I have to, I'm not saying I was the top heel, but I was a good wrestling heel. And I'm one of only a few people who've wrestled in front of 250,000 people and been the only match on the card and survived when I was a heel against a local national hero and it's 250 million of his fans. I believe that I've talked about it before. If a heel doesn't have a good antenna and a way to be picking up all kinds of different kind of indications of what's going on with the audience, you're in big trouble because you'll go too far and you'll do it someplace where maybe there's no protection or the cops are lazy or whatever, and you're going to get hurt, maybe even stabbed or whatever. I felt that by that time my wrestling vibrational receptors had been developed to the point, and I still have it. Yeah, you never know out there who you're going to run into. But anyway, with McMahon, I didn't see anything there. I mean, he didn't offer to shake hands, but he already said, "Well, if you're trying to steal my business, why would I shake hands with you? Go after yourself." I don't think Vince stepped from him and said, "Well, hey, Bob Roop, you're a big star. Will you shake my hand?" I don't think he did that. So anyway, no, I was never in. And if he'd have called and wanted me to work for him, I wouldn't have done it. That might sound like BS, but by that time I had my boys, and I had Ryan anyway, one of my first middle son, but the youngest one is still with me, and I wasn't going to be. I decided I wasn't going to be going away from my family anymore. So anyway, where are we going now?
I don't know that we ever got to the question that was asked, so I'll ask this again. Do you remember when these guys left, do you remember there was anything said or done, or did they just disappear one day?
They were just gone. Always, just pragmatic. But gone, they're gone. Now what do we do? It's always moving forward. It's always moving forward. There's never,
I was just wondering if you remembered if they put in a notice or if they just didn't show up one day.
I don't know that part, and okay. I should, but I think they just left. Because now Ole never said anything, but I think if they'd given a notice, I don't know, maybe they called him on the phone. I don't know, but I certainly never saw him in the office. I would have been there. I was in the office every day, so with Ole.
Well, you can see as you watch the results change. They shift. These guys leave. Other stars start coming in. Ole's starting to try to make sense of what he has to work with here. And no offense to anybody on the roster, but you see your opening matches at the Omni, they go from the likes of Sweet Brown Sugar versus Tully Blanchard to the Italian Stallion versus Ali Bey the Turk or something along those lines or something like this. So,
right.
Things are definitely changing. I'm looking at this card right here. It looks like Ole, again, grasping for straws. He's bringing Gene out of retirement. His kayfabe brother Gene, they're in the ring doing some tag team work here in 1984 into 1985. So Gene had some health issues and stepped away from the ring. And he would come back from time to time. It wasn't like this was the first time he'd ever come back in the ring, but to be used here with Ole in this situation, it just feels like desperation. I need anything I can get. And you just see friends of Ole pop up. Stan Hansen comes in and works the Omni. Obviously Ole and Stan were buddies. We saw them multiple times together. And so I guess Ole makes a phone call here and there and guys are coming in to help, but he can't sustain them as a full-time roster member, especially Stan, who was making $1 gazillion over in Japan. So, but I'm just looking, obviously Tommy Rich is Mr. Georgia forever. Buzz Sawyer's still here because, Ole puts up with this shit for whatever reason. So, and then he even calls on you, Bob. You got to get out of the office and into the wrestling ring once again. So you can see where he's pulling from everywhere he can, grasping at straws to keep this thing going. And he does so for another, it starts in the summer of 84 and he keeps matriculating his way to wherever he thinks he's headed all the way into March of 1985. So he spends some time. Do you remember during that period, Ole changing at all? I mean, Ole was already a gruff person and a straightforward person. I can't see him becoming even more, I don't know, somebody might call it miserable. But did Ole become more concerned? Did he change in any way? Do you remember?
No.
Okay.
No, he had first of all, he had a personal fortune. He also had a personal business that was bringing him a good income. I think, you've got a lumber mill, and I told you I told our listener and you on another that he had told me about buying woodland. He had bought this piece of property for fairly cheap. That had been half of it had been like grazing land, and it sold fairly cheap. But it had hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of wood on it, and trees, big old trees, for his lumber mill. And so he had his lumber mill. He had the lumber. He had the ability to make lumber. So he had something to follow. I mean, I don't know how many millions of dollars he had, but if you got even $8 million in the bank, you certainly feel a lot more comfortable than if you don't have, you got 10 cents in the bank. But no, I never saw him. I never saw him despair. I never saw him depressed. I never saw him frustrated to the point of like, well, I give up. He was just straightforward. He'd get an idea. He'd do whatever he could. He was competitive. He was determined. He was going to try to beat that.
Right. You brought up a good point, though, which I failed to remember, was that Ole already was a successful businessman outside of wrestling. He was already likely a millionaire by this point. So this was kind of like not only his secondary business, but obviously there was a lot of ego and pride in keeping the wrestling company afloat, because this is where he had, started. This is where it all started, was in the wrestling ring for Ole, and this was his baby, right? He had ousted Jim Barnett from handling some of the financial aspects of things and taken over, and it looked like business was picking up, if you will. And then maybe there was some rough patches. I've heard a lot of people say that 1983 wasn't their best year financially, but it wasn't like you guys were in the shitter either. And so,
no.
And by 1984, obviously things happen the way they happen.
Well, let me interrupt first.
Sure.
Because about Ole, he, like you say, he had his own personal fortune, but he also had the stature of, before McMahon. At the time McMahon was. I remember we tried to get Hulk Hogan. We went up to Hulk Hogan. He was working, I think, for Gagne at the time.
Yeah.
And we were looking at trying to get Hulk Hogan, and McMahon hadn't done. We all know the story. He came very close to not making it, and they had the Super WrestleMania, and he made enough to pay for everything, and that was. Well, at the time, he wasn't there yet, so Ole still had. As long as he had those 2 hours on TBS, he was the wrestling promoter, and thus, even compared to Vince McMahon Sr. And after Vinny Jr. bought him out, they were still basically working mostly those East Coast towns. And then Vince Jr. started eating up territories and moving around the country. Well, he hadn't done it yet. He hadn't gotten there completely yet. So Ole still felt like he had the stature of being number one promoter in the country. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think he didn't wear a leather jacket or something with a big number one on the back, but I think that had some bearing in terms of, when people talked to him, when he went out to the NWA thing out in Las Vegas, he was one of the big dogs out there. And so, and again, it's not ego. Ole's bottom line was money. And the fact is that when those Ohio towns started clicking, what were we talking about? $250,000 every time they went up there?
It was crazy money, especially Columbus and Cleveland.
Yeah. So you're talking about, millions of dollars over a period of a year. You're talking about some serious money. And, a lot of at the time, the NWA promoters who had a single territory, like Florida, for example, they weren't making that kind of, anywhere near that kind of money. And they weren't able to promote anywhere but inside their own territorial lines. So Ole could because actually, he only went to Ohio, Michigan, West Virginia, Georgia, nothing in Florida. I don't think we went to Alabama. So, but anyway, he had that stature as like one of the major promoters. And I think it took him a while to realize just what a threat that McMahon Jr. had become. I'm not sure he could even believe what happened when he was able to buy the TV out from under him, because he, again, had felt that the Briscoes were going to stand by him. And he didn't know, I think, that Paul Jones was out of the picture. Didn't you tell me that Paul Jones was widow, or not widow, but his wife was...
The way Ole writes it in his book, his wife was basically handling things for Paul. Paul was up there in age by this point. I don't know if that was it was a health thing. I'm not sure what it was, but Ole just remarked something along the lines of, boy, if Paul Jones and his family knew what Jim Barnett used to say about him behind his back, he would have never have sold. But, I mean, money talks at the end of the day anyway, and it wasn't even Paul likely making the decision at that point. I don't know what kind of health situation he was in, if he was even in the mental capacity to make the decision for himself. But the way Ole writes it in his book, he refers to it as his wife and his family were making the decisions for Paul around that point in time. So you have to imagine there was, something to that.
Depending on what kind of income they were getting, and with Paul, failing, I'm sure she was feeling insecure. And if, about her future, I'm not sure if she was close to her husband's age or younger or much younger. I don't know what their situation was. Maybe he had kids in college. I don't know. But if you got an offer, the man came along with an offer of multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever, it would probably be hard for her to turn down. And if Paul Jones was in no position to legally make a decision, if she was the one doing it, I could see how she would. Well, for some reason, Ole didn't check. I don't remember ever hearing about him talking to her. In fact, I don't remember ever hearing him talk to Paul Jones. But he was, you know what it was? He had a very close relationship with Ralph Reed. Because didn't you tell me on one of the shows that McMahon didn't just have 51%, he had like 70 or something like that?
It was like 60-some%, I believe, if I remember correctly.
Right. Well, what Paul Jones have, 30-something?
I'm not sure what he had, but he had a good chunk because he had been there forever.
Yeah. Well,
so, he had a good chunk.
Yeah. So yeah, I can't say I blame her. But as far as Ole's attitude, no, he never. Again, Ole's a very confident guy. He had these cut marks on his chest where he got stabbed. I mean, he got cut bad, and he never made a big deal about it. He never would show you the scars unless you asked him. We were working a show, and I said, "Hey, show me those scars." And he got cut really bad. He never talked about that stuff.
Yeah.
He just onward and upwards, and he just, if one thing didn't work, well, that was stupid. That's a piece of crap. So he'd go on with something else. You got to remember, this is a guy that was like booking 7, 8 towns a night. The talent and creativity and memory it takes to do that is astounding. That's another thing. Going way back to when we were talking about Nick Patrick as a referee, the referee doesn't just have to remember one finish like a wrestler does. He has to remember all of them. I mean, his part is not just the 1, 2, 3. His part also has to be having his back turned when the guy pulls out the knife or the gun, or not the gun, but the brass knucks. And so he has to know his part in all those matches. Now, not all of them are involved. Some of them are, fairly cut and dried and, fairly simple A to B, but some of them aren't. And, if you're working a big show, now in the big shows, usually there'd be 2 referees because one guy really shouldn't be expected to remember everything. But Nick Patrick was very, very good at that. We talked about the one where he counted 3 when the guy had raised his shoulder. Mm-hmm. Well, he learned from that because I never saw him make a mistake, let's put it that way. So I just want to interject that. He was a smart guy. He had a good mind.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com, and to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. But that's not all. You can also check out the Pro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Pro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
So I had a couple more names here, just some random names we haven't really discussed in the past. Do you remember a guy by the name of Ron Slinker?
Oh, yeah. A karate. Yeah, Ron was a nice guy, good guy. You know, he was probably, I don't want to say a badass, because let's put it this way. I think he was capable. Apparently he had some martial arts knowledge.
Yeah, he was a karate expert. I think he had participated in something like 30 karate tournaments and won like all but 2 of them.
He was a badass. I mean, he didn't look it. He was, I guess you'd say, lean and mean. He really didn't look like an athlete. He was kind of like me. He was kind of straight up and down, and he was balding. He wore his hair long on the side. He was combed back for a while, kind of like mine is now. But he was a good guy, a good talent. I was never in a territory where he got pushed. I booked him a few times, and I might have put him in like some kind of angle underneath, but I never put him in anything really hot with like a top baby face. It wasn't that I didn't think he could handle it, but here we go again. His interviews weren't anything. He wasn't really great on the horn, and maybe because he didn't have anything to talk about, but he wasn't in an angle or something.
Right.
But he didn't have that fire, that someone like Hawk had, where you just a guy. You see a guy, he look like he's chewing his lip. He's just looking around for somebody to attack or to beat up. Someone who's got that killer attitude. Maybe his own background worked against him. The fact that he was sincerely tough, the fact that he was in real life, he probably could beat about 9 out of every 10 guys in the business. Maybe that had him looking less. He was never too concerned about anything. And maybe that's why he looked so confident all the time. But good man, he's a good man, good talent. I never saw a match he had that was terrible or even bad. He'd have good matches, and he'd do what he was asked to do. So, another good one. Yeah. His background, what was happening? I mean, what's he doing now?
No, Ron passed away quite a while ago. He had some issues with the law and things of that nature. If I remember correctly, he passes away from like alcoholism or something, but there was also a lot of drug-related charges and things that were going on in his life later on. So it's unfortunate. I know he did for a while there, but he wound up doing training and trained a lot of people. I think he helped a couple of guys break into the business even. I'm not saying he taught them how to wrestle per se, but he had some people he knew and spread some word. I think he even got, a lot of people might know the name Rob Van Dam. I believe he got Rob hooked up with All Japan. Yeah, Ron Slinker out of Florida. So from what I remember, I haven't watched any of his stuff in quite a while, but just coming from a fan's point of view was Ron just seemed awkward in the ring. Like he kind of understood the business, but it didn't flow, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and it could be coming from a different, background, like a martial arts background. So it could be something that played into that, but I don't really know, but you don't really hear a whole lot of people talk about him. And he was around for a while. So I thought that would be an interesting name to throw at you there.
Well, when I hear the name, it brings back pleasurable thoughts. I mean, I never had an issue with him. I booked him, or worked in territories with him and worked in the ring with him and never had a problem. But he wasn't a guy. He wasn't unfriendly, but he wasn't really outgoing. And I hate to say this, but I'll tell you in my own behavior, one of the reasons that I drove by myself was when I was doing drugs. When I was smoking pot and whatever. In some places, you had a lot of boys that would shoot you off to the office.
Right.
And if you're using anything harder, I didn't want people knowing my business. So I would drive by myself if I was going to do anything. And I never did anything real hard for very long. But in Miami, during the cocaine heyday, you could go in the dressing room. I think that's still just before, but you could go in the dressing room in Miami in the Jackie Gleason building. They had, it was like a theater. You had backstage, you had all these rooms, separate rooms for actors, like say in a stage play, could have their own dressing room to change out. The stars would all have, they have 3-4 dressing rooms for the stars to change out and, put their valuables in and all that. And whenever we worked there, after the cocaine thing started, it was a rare show that you couldn't go and one of the boys who was doing coke would say, "Hey, come in here." And you go and there'd be a guy, there'd be some little guy that looked exactly like someone from Miami Vice, been busted for cocaine dealing, would be standing in there, and one of them, I remember there was a plate on the table the size of a dinner plate, and it looked like somebody had taken a full pint measuring and dipped it into a big bag of coke and just dumped it on the plate. And it made a big mound, and they stuck a straw in it. And so the guy, and I didn't know they weren't selling it. Now they might have been promoting a sale. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And I don't blame the boys. I did it myself. I didn't do it long, and I knew it was bad for me, and I made a promise about 35 years ago, I was going to clean up my act, and I did, and I have, and I've kept it clean, and it wasn't all that dirty to begin with.
Right.
But let's put it this way: I never even had a marijuana cigarette or joint until I was 27 years old. That should give an indication that I had a fairly. Now I drank a lot of beer. When you're a wrestler in college, that's the way you replenish fluids. But
when you're in college, anyway, period, that's how you replenish.
Yeah, exactly. So, but what I'm leading up to, one of the reasons Ron might have been, and I'm not saying he went in the ring stone, but one of the reasons he might have been kind of quiet and aloof would be maybe the same reason I had for not wanting people, not getting close to people or
sure.
Whatever. What you said about him having drug problems is what brought that on, because it would explain a couple of questions that we asked ourselves when we were talking about him. Why would he look so awkward, and why would he be so quiet? And I don't remember if he ever traveled with anybody or not. But anyway, onward and upward.
I'm just going through some names here. Do you remember, we talked about Scott Irwin on more than one occasion here, but he had a younger brother, Bill Irwin, that came through the business as well. Do you remember working around Bill at all?
Yeah, Bill, if you're out there, is he still around?
Yeah, he's there. He's out there.
Bless you, Bill. I hope everything's fine. Scott was one of the friendliest and nicest, most pleasant, fun guys to be around in the world. His brother was the exact opposite. What a pain in the ass. I mean, he wasn't like nagging but he was like kind of a killjoy. His brother was, now Scott at the time knew he was dying. He had a brain tumor. And so he was living life to the full. I mean, it was something that was going to take several years to kill him. But at the time, there was nothing they could do to stop it.
Okay.
He knew he was dying. But yeah, I mean, he stayed healthy for years. And he had that motorcycle gimmick, and he fit right in with those. He would have fit right in with the Hells Angels because he was a big, tough guy. And he was a lot of fun to be with. In fact, we could be on tour, and Scott and I, and maybe DiBiase, whoever would go out, and Bill wouldn't go. If he was with us, he wouldn't go. I know I took Scott to my house, or my mom's house, to stay over like with the Road Warriors and all that. Because I remember him supposed to give my mom a big hug, but I don't know if Bill won, or maybe he wasn't on that trip. But Bill, as far as his wrestling, he was fine. He was a good hand in the ring. I mean, he wasn't big and thick like his brother. He was probably, 50 pounds lighter. But he's a good hand. Again, he didn't let me get to know him personally well enough to be able to form a real opinion. He was just kind of a downer. It's hard to get him to smile, or it wasn't just that he was quiet. He was quiet, and he seemed to have an attitude of some kind that made you feel like there was something wrong with you, just for being alive. So, and I wish him the best. Could have been just me, might have been, some aspect of my personality that turned him off, and maybe it's because I was working in the office. But Scott never seemed to mind. I mean, he was one of the guys I could hang around with even working in the office, where I didn't have to worry about him trying to take liberties or anything else. He knew the business well enough. I had more fun with him on the road than just about anybody I was ever with. He could take a 6-pack of beer or just go in a bar. He'd take over a bar, and I mean, I don't mean in a rough way. He wouldn't.
Right.
But he just, with his good humor and
the center of attention kind of deal.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be around you because we're having a good time. I get it.
We were in some little Ohio town, and he had met a girl at the matches, and she said, "Well, I'm going to be at this so-and-so bar. Why don't you come over and we'll have a beer or something?" And so he told me about it. So we went, me and him. We walk in the door, and the bar, it's late. It's after the matches, so it's, I don't know. I think it's a weekday night, so it's 12 o'clock, 11:30. There's not many people in the bar. It's not a great big bar. It was a few tables where people could eat too, or sit and drink beer. But most everybody was at the bar. Well, this girl this girl's name was, let's say, Rhonda. We walk in the door, and we're about 50 feet from the bar, and everybody's, facing the bar. And Scott comes in the door, opens the door, walks in, he says, "I'm looking for Rhonda," and just yelled it out, "Rhonda, where's Rhonda?" Just came marching up towards the bar, and here came Rhonda. She was thrilled. Oh, now here's the deal. This is a local bar. There's about 10 guys in there who are not fans of anybody but the locals, especially men, being in there and hitting on their women, or what they consider their women. Believe me, I had eyes in the back of my head the whole time I was in there. But Scott just walked in, just loud as he could be. You know what? And that kind of stuff works because, when the guy's 6'4", 6'5", weighs 300 pounds and, is bearded and he's got on motorcycle gear and he comes in and he's brash and friendly too. I mean, he wasn't like, "Hey, all you pukes, sit down." He was friendly. He might have bought a keg of beer for a bunch of people. I don't know, but I always appreciate it because I see my way of doing things was a complete opposite. I would try to find another way to go into the bar and check it out before I ever even went up and ordered a glass of water, because I want to see what kind of bar is this, and is it safe for me? We were heels, we were heels. So yeah, Scott was just a lot of fun to be around, a real joy. And in comparison to Scott, Bill was just complete opposite, really. And I don't know, he was younger, so maybe that has something to do with it. And again, it could have been something that could have been me. But anyway, a good hand, good talent. I have no complaints or nothing to say at all about his talent. He was a good hand. I don't remember him being any real hot angles. Scott was a top hand just about everywhere he went.
Right.
I don't remember Bill being on top, at least not for me. But anyway, that's what I know.
Oh, Bill, that's fair enough. No, yeah, Bill. Most of Bill's biggest pushes would come when he was tag teaming with his brother Scott. I mean, Bill would get work. He would find work with WCW, the WWF, all the way into the mid '90s here and there. So. He spent some time in Dallas, obviously. He did a little tag run there for Bill Watts in 1986 as well. So he always found work. So he was definitely, a credible hand in the ring.
Yeah.
But I get what you're saying when we're talking about on a personal level where things didn't really mesh so well. So I'm scrolling through, and it doesn't happen that often by this point in the Georgia run with Ole, but back in the day, the lady wrestlers would come through. Here and there and whatnot. And of course, most of them, at least the ones handled by the NWA in certain territories, were trained or at least came out of the Fabulous Moolah camp. And I have to ask you, did you ever have any interactions with the Fabulous Moolah?
Yeah, I met her, of course, and I worked on some cards with her. We had a girl. One of my first Moolah stories is I was fairly young in the business, and there was a girl who had been I don't want to say an arena rat groupie, but she had been hanging around the matches because in Miami because she wanted to get in the business. And Harley Race took a liking to her, and somehow he got her trained with Moolah.
Okay.
And she came back after, I don't know, months, whatever. She came back and she had all these stories about Moolah Moolah had her own training camp. And she had her students stayed there. Apparently, right. She had like a motel type thing or cabins or something.
Yeah. Where
the girls stayed, and apparently Moolah expected sexual favors as part of the payment for her training. Mm. And this girl came back from it, and she was all pushed out of shape about some of the things that Moolah had asked her to do. But the other thing that she was doing was that, in the public, in front of Mark or non-wrestling fans, she'd been smart enough to the business, of course. Right. She was talking about the business. And I remember now that I was very young in the business because Eddie Graham had this mantra, basically, instead of you said instead of to find peace, you said, I will not expose the business. I will not expose the business. Right. I will not expose the business. So I went back and I called Eddie Graham like, I went back to Tampa, and I called. I think we flew that time, so I got back fairly early, and I called Eddie, and I said, "Hey, there's this girl," and I explained the situation, just what I told you and our listeners, and he said, "Meet me at the office." So I went down to the office at what's the name of the street? Albany on the
106 North Albany. Yeah.
106 North Albany. Yeah, at least I remember the street. And so he got on the phone, and I'm like in the front area where the Charlie Lace at the reception, like desk, and I was standing on the other side of it. And he got on the phone. He said he called Moolah, and he cussed her like a dog, But he said, "Hey, listen," he was really rough with her. He said, blah blah blah. You trained somebody, you didn't get them to smart. He set them loose. They come up here now. They're going on my town, talking, smartening everybody up, and blah blah blah. And it's like shoot her a new one. And so that settled, to me that took care of it. My opinion right now is that he was talking to a dial tone. I just don't see Eddie Graham really doing that.
Oh, okay. So he was doing that for your benefit,
for my benefit. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, he was in this to protect the business guy. But yeah, he talked to Moolah like, she was a dog, and I just don't see him doing that. And he knew I was still half. Very. I don't want to say a mark. A mark is somebody just really stupid. But I was still. You'll spend $15 to win a $2 teddy bear. But I wasn't experienced. So his little shtick on the phone, impressed me. Like, he's a big wig. I mean, he's telling us. I knew that Moolah was a big deal as far as the women's part. And when I say big deal, she was a big name and had been for years.
Right.
Now, she had lost most of her looks. She's probably 50 at the time.
Some people would argue she didn't have them to begin with, Bob, but you're being generous.
Well, I mean, she had the talent. She was a good worker. As far as that camp she was at, sounds like a nightmare, But
yeah.
I never got close to her. I never rode in a car with her. She didn't have any time for many men that I knew of. But yeah, I told you a story about Eddie on the phone, where he had talked to me one time, holding his nose and pretending to be somebody else, and then years later he did it with somebody else while I was sitting in the office across from him, my desk. He did it with somebody else. I looked at him. I said, "Oh man," he lost about half of any regard I had from him with that.
I can imagine when you see somebody you looked up to that kind of level do.
Yeah.
That would definitely take the wind out of your sail for certain. So I want to go back to Moolah here, man, because there's a lot of stories out there about her, and there's a lot of lady wrestlers that have told stories, and there's ones that have also said Moolah was fine with me, I didn't have any issues with her, and they're the same people that 20 years ago were telling a different tune. So there's a lot of different variations, and one of them, the most common, and this actually happened a lot, not just in women's wrestling, but in wrestling in general, was that sometimes these guys, these trainers, if you will, would con the students, unless there was some sort of a deal worked out where they didn't have to pay to train and whatever, but to get a percentage of whatever they were going to make at the shows. But Moolah's was a little different because, from my understanding, a lot of the time she would get paid and then she would disperse the money if she was on the card. So
very likely
all of the ladies that she trained had to give her a percentage. Booking fees is what it was. She was booking them out. So they were paying for booking fees and training fees and whatever fees. And, obviously I don't know what they made at the end of the day. I mean, some of them stuck with it, like a Leilani Kai, a Judy Martin. Those ladies were around for quite a while, but then you see other girls come and go. Like, what happened to her? She was only around for a year and she looked decent, but obviously eventually some would break away and do their own thing, like a Sherry Martel. But at the same time, that's the common story. We've heard that with wrestlers as well. Like Larry Sharp, Pretty Boy Larry Sharp up from the Northeast, who had Bam Bam Bigelow, who was a huge commodity at that point in time in the mid to late 80s. He was getting a percentage of Bam Bam till Bam Bam said, "Wait a minute, why are you getting money for, whatever?" And so But these other stories, like you just kind of went through it like it was a matter of fact story that everybody knew about. And we've heard the stories of what Moolah may or may not have been doing in that, as you said, nightmare camp down there. And I think it was South Colombia, I believe it was.
Yeah. It sounds like a real, just a snake pit of, it's had the one in Florida on Albany Street, and apparently she had one at her place too. That's the worst kind of behavior.
So was that the only time you actually heard a direct story about that, or did somebody else ever mention something like that in front of you? And I'm not asking you to name names, but I'm just curious, was that something you heard? Was that a common story, a common theme you would hear with Moolah? Was that type of request is the best? Okay.
I don't remember in the car anybody ever talking about Moolah to any length, but if they did, that always came up, that she was a lesbian. I don't have a problem with that.
Right.
But if you're a lesbian, in order for you to train somebody, you force them to, to do things with you. That's a crime.
Yeah.
There's been other wrestling people a lot more influential, important, and wealthy than Moolah who have found that out too. That kind of behavior, forcing people to have sex with you, is illegal. And you can go to jail, or if you have a lot of money, we talked about this, you probably aren't going anywhere. Moolah, those stories, I certainly, and the other thing is, she was never really friendly. She wasn't outgoing. And, I booked, when I was booking, of course I booked lady wrestlers, and I always tried to, be pleasant with them and respectful and all that. A couple times, we'd fly to Puerto Rico on Lester Welch's plane. We'd be on that plane for 10 hours each way. And we had a couple times we had girls. Well, Sherry Lee was always on the plane because she was Lester's, I don't know whatever you want to call it. She was, unless you were hooked up, but, or supposedly. I don't want her to, Lester's gone, but I don't want to hurt her. But there'd be another girl wrestler on the plane that would work with Sherry in Puerto Rico. One time it was Ella Waldeck. She had been retired from wrestling for a long time. Of course, it comes right back to you. It's kind of like falling off a bicycle. Ella was famous in Tampa for, she worked as a security in a store, like a big, say a Saks Fifth Avenue or something like that. And a guy shoplifted, a big guy apparently, shoplifted and went out of the store, and she went after him, and he stopped and told her to F off. And meanwhile they were calling the police. By the time the police got there, she had this big guy down. He's screaming, "Help! Get her off me!" She knew how to shoot. She had this guy hooked about 3 different ways. And, of course, the story was, now the guy could have, maybe in real life, the guy was 100 pounds, but the way the stories go when wrestlers tell them, by the time I got it, it's up to 300,
Oh,
but,
yeah. 7 feet 5, 500 pounds. Sound familiar?
Yes. Yeah. It was Andre's brother.
That's what it was.
Yeah. But, and, with her, and with Sherry, I liked her. She was friendly. She was pleasant and all that. Mm-hmm. But I think all those girls that they had to go through that kind of experience, it was certainly taint whatever kind of career they had.
Yeah.
It's just some things that eat away at your self-respect. That there's just no amount of money can replace.
Yeah, but Moolah was very cutthroat. The stories you hear, the things she did, tried to blackball anybody who left her camp. That wouldn't work. You can't really, we've already pointed out, you can't really blackball anybody with any type of talent. And some territories would use the ladies that were not Moolah's girls, especially Vern Gagne, for one. Off the top of my head, he only used non-Moolah ladies. I'm not sure if Vern didn't get along with Moolah or he wasn't really, big on the stories that came out with that. But there's stories later on, she sabotaged some of the ladies that were getting runs for Vince McMahon in the late 80s and whatnot, telling them to, making calls on behalf of Vince who did not tell her to do it, and telling them to do jobs or to go over when they weren't supposed to. And story, like Leilani Kai's told the story that, they gotten a push there. They've given him a gimmick, given him Jimmy Hart as a manager. Vince has started bringing back the women's side of things in the company in the late 80s. And they brought a couple of ladies over from Japan who were really getting over. You can imagine what they, compared to the American ladies, you can imagine what they were doing in the ring. And the fans were really receptive, and it was getting over. So Vince was putting them on pay-per-views and things. And then they go back to Japan. They work the tag match over there, and Moolah calls over there and says, well, Vince said to do the job or to go over. I can't remember which one it was, but they switched the titles in Japan without Vince's knowledge. Vince finds out, and he just cancels the entire division. The women,
oh my God!
Yeah, and it was all supposedly it was Moolah's doing because they had defected from her. She was no longer collecting a percentage of their money anymore, and they were getting their own bookings. So Moolah was kind of over it, and that's a story that's out there, But I mean, that's back to the cutthroat business side of things. But I've heard the stories, from the one you told here to the ones where supposedly some of the greener girls that were just breaking in, she was pimping them out. I don't know if it was to wrestlers or other people, but she was pimping them out and kind of forcing them to do whatever. And there's photos out there that were supposedly taken as well, like photo shoots and things of,
oh my God,
revealing photos of a couple of the ladies. So there's a lot of things. And a few years back, and for quite a while now, by the way, Bob, for all the guys who can't make it to WrestleMania, there's just not enough room on the show for everybody. They do what they call an Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal because Andre was known for the Battle Royal. So they get all the guys who can't make it to the big show and they put them in a Battle Royal, just give them something to do. And it was named after Andre. In respect to Andre, there's a big giant trophy in the shape of Andre the Giant. Well, a few years ago, they decided, well, there's a lot of ladies left off the show too. Let's create a Battle Royal for the ladies. And they were going to call that the Fabulous Moolah Memorial Battle Royal. And they had a trophy with Moolah, and the backlash online shut that down in about a week. Like all of a sudden it was just called a Battle Royal after that. Like because of these stories. So, I mean, they're out there. You know what I mean?
Well, that's just, those are horror stories, man. I mean, yes. I've talked ad nauseum about the price you pay, missing what you miss by being on the road all the time. But to have to go through something like that directly affects your character, just terrible. So I haven't thought of Moolah in years, and I'm going to make sure I'm not going to think of.
I apologize, but we don't talk about the ladies very often, and that was certainly a name that I thought, she had been in the business long before you got in it, and she was still in it here at this point in the mid 80s. So probably a good time to bring her up here before we continue on. So I'm happy, but I'm not so happy to hear that the stories are true as far as but I'm happy that we got that out there, that was brought out on a podcast, because it's coming from someone who, you worked throughout the entire 1970s. So I'm sure you heard this time and time again. Not that it was brought up that I'm sure a lot of people didn't want to think about Moolah when they were riding up and down the roads with all these beautiful ladies and things. But it's just, you see and you hear the stories of the guys interacting with her. And I'm not saying she was a Southern belle. She was tough and mean and whatever, but she would talk to them would just be very respectful, very polite. Hi, honey, how are you doing today? And her little Southern shtick and whatnot. But clearly behind the scenes, she was, people talk about Vince McMahon Jr. I mean, she was kind of like Vince McMahon Jr. in a lot of ways.
Well, the same. His charges were human trafficking, where you make somebody have sex with somebody else,
Right.
And that's what she was doing with those girls. So she broke the law, felony. I mean, I don't know, probably how many hundreds, maybe thousands of times over the years that she practiced that. She probably was charging the guys. She could, or at least getting favors, or the other women, if she was selling her girls to gay women. Yeah, well, you talk about a heel. What a heel.
It's amazing. Even though I understand it's like a different world back then. It was Wild West. It was dirty. It was seedy. It was the underworld. And what, it's still crazy to think that if you were doing that for as long as she was doing that, allegedly doing that she got away with it. Like nobody ever, it was never taken seriously to the point where it was investigated or anything like that. So it's crazy that these stories are out there and they're told with fact behind them, the way people tell them. But, and then there's a handful that say, no, she was good to me. So I'm not sure, if they're just kind of at peace, with that part of their life and just kind of remember the good parts or what the situation is. But, and I'm not saying it happened to all of them either. Maybe it didn't, but there,
think about this. So if it did happen, maybe you don't want to say it did. You don't want to say, yeah, I had to have sex with this wrinkled up old bag in order to have a career, in order to get trained.
Right.
I didn't have enough money to pay, so I had to do sexual favors. And, I had to go out with men she brought me or women or whatever. Who the hell's going to admit that? I mean, riding in the car right down the road with beer. No, nobody's going to admit that. And don't get me wrong. If all the girls that say it didn't happen, I pray it didn't. I really didn't. Mm-hmm. But I think it's got to be at least a few that don't want to admit it, because how would you interject that into a conversation?
No, I get it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so despicable. I mean, the wrestling business is not really a despicable business because nobody really gets hurt by it, in my mind. I mean, and the pervading attitude is that it's theater, it's make believe. I mean, it's put on. It's not real. What's happening is not real. And I had talked to you earlier while one of the reasons we were talking so long, I had talked about being in a real fight and what I look like after a real brawl compared to what guys look like. They'll go out there and look like they get punched 50 times and don't even have a black eye, bloody nose, or bump on their head. Yeah, what Moolah sounds just like a monster, really. That if that behavior is true, she's truly a moral monster. But there's, I don't know any guys that had to do that. I mean, Barnett was gay, but I don't remember, he never asked any wrestler I know of.
I think Jim's class was above a sweaty old wrestler, though, right?
Yes, yeah. Jim was. I'm not going to even speculate, but he kept his business to himself.
Sure.
Moolah was exceptionally risky with her, so doing that with girls and then sending them out in the world to work. Now they didn't call that at the time human trafficking when you farm somebody out for sex. They didn't call it at the time, but it certainly was. It was a crime. We basically forced someone to have sex with someone. Anyway, well, you are what you are, and if that's her legacy. I doubt if there's very, very many of her relatives that are proud to be claiming that. Oh yeah, my grandmother or my great aunt was Moolah. I doubt very few. I doubt there's very few people. I don't know. Maybe they think that kind of stuff's okay, but we hit a lot of high notes in our talks over the last year. That's kind of a low one, but it's I think it's appropriate because it was part of the business. It was part of the business I was in. A lot of the guys today, might not even have heard of Moolah, but it was part of what was going on at the time. So, promoters that conned everybody, include other promoters, conned anybody they could. So anyway, well, let's move on.
Well, actually, we are getting ready to wrap it up here, Bob. I know you got something big coming up in Waterloo here in the summer once again. Are you going to be visiting Waterloo?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for reminding me.
Absolutely.
Yes, Waterloo, it's George Tragos, Lou Thez Wrestling Hall of Fame. And Tragos was the guy who trained Lou Thez, not in pro wrestling. He trained him to hook. One of Tragos's claim to fame was that his college kid came in one day and wanted to work out with him, and he took the guy. He broke his arm so bad, the guy had to have it amputated. Isn't that a nice story to be one of the guys in the Hall of Fame? And that's one of his claim to fame.
It's named after, yeah.
Well, he was back. Those were back in the days of like Strangler Lewis.
Oh yeah,
those guys. Like Thez was associated with Strangler Lewis, and things were different back then. A lot of the matches they weren't when they wrestled in the ring. That was a work, but they had a shoot earlier in the week in the gym. the two guys that would be paired, they'd have a match in the gym, and whoever won in the gym, because they weren't coming back to these towns every week. They were going from town to town, like on a circuit.
Yeah.
But you weren't coming back. You wouldn't be coming back. Or they'd be in the fairgrounds, for example. And the ad shows at the fairground, before they got air conditioning in buildings in the summer, the only wrestling took place out at state fairs and county fairs in tents, because the buildings, like arenas and things, got so hot during the day, you couldn't put people in there at night without half of them getting a heat stroke. So, but during these ad shows, they had shooters, guys who really could shoot, and they had the story is working, the actual learning to work and pretend to shoot, looking like you're shooting, kind of started in the ad shows, where guys would go out there and do what they would put on a show, because they had an audience. They would charge people to come in to see them in the show, and even the mainstream wrestlers would do that. I'm sure Lou Thez probably worked in that show. And Waterloo, the thing I like about it is because you have to have both an amateur background of some note, and I qualify for that by being an Olympian. I have been a pro wrestler of some note, and I qualify for that from, 15, 18 years of fairly steady success, working on top, or being figured into whatever programs, and also what we talked about, not just being a wrestler, but being a booker and a guy who ran shows, an agent, a road agent. The road agent job for Ole in Ohio, when he didn't come up there, I was the boss. Now, that was with a little codicil. I would get people like Buzz that would go over my head. But basically, I would tell people what to do. There were Ole's instructions for the main event anyway, but I would handle the rest of the card, and I would also handle any problems that came up. There was one time the referee didn't show up. I refereed that night. Another time there was no timekeeper, so I was out there doing the timekeeper. Whatever was needed. But I also collected the money at the box office at the end of the night, which was a big responsibility. I remember the first show I went on, the guy paid me in cash, didn't give me a check. I had $28,000 in cash in my wrestling bag, and I had to carry it to a motel, and I was going to deposit it the next morning in the bank. And oh man, was I nervous! I thought, oh man, these guys, whether they're going to have somebody follow me or whatever. Right. I mean, I wasn't real nervous, but I was by myself because
that's paying your dues and learning how to watch your own ass too, right? At the same time.
Yeah. Well, thanks for letting me go on, Ray.
Yeah,
and again, Waterloo, 17th, 18th, and 19th of July.
Right.
I'm going to be there. I hope a lot of you folks that share your time with us now. I hope you'll come to Waterloo. I'd really love to see you and say thanks. And thank you, Ray, for today. You're the best.
Yeah, it's the 26th annual Hall of Fame weekend, and you guys can get an all-access pass for $140. That includes everything all weekend, guys. It's the best deal they have. They do have other deals. If you guys want to look into that, stop online and go check it out. But I believe the $140 all-access pass, if I'm not mistaken, includes a kiss from Bob Roop. So, yeah, talk about, now I'm human trafficking, but no.
Well, you know what? For $25 less, you don't have to kiss me. No, that's a good one. Yeah, I would, it'd be nice to see. And the thing is, folks, or basically the way it works, you're mingling with the pro wrestlers, the guys in the hall that are already in the Hall of Fame, guys like Jerry Briscoe and Baron von Raschke, myself, and
you never know who's going to show up.
No, you never do. And there's a new class that's going to be inducted this year. That's what they do. Nice. They induct class every year, and part of that $140 is for a banquet. It's a really nice banquet where you have waiters and all that, or the food is really great, and you have a ceremony, you have the presentations, and a lot of times, I mean, it's a great weekend. It goes on from Thursday night. People are getting there Thursday all day, but the official activities start on Friday, go through Saturday evening, and then wind up on Saturday morning. And it's just a great time. I really hope to see a lot of you out there. Anyway, thanks for listening to us today. And everybody, please stay well once you listen again next week. And thank you, Ray.